Right. Okay. So, hi. Um, welcome back to my channel. Look, I don't normally script videos. I'm deeply committed on this channel to making, unscripted, unfiltered content. Uh, but with a film of this scope and this magnitude, I just had to, I really, really had to. There was no way that I wasn't going to let my thoughts on Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, which came out, June? July? I wasn't going to let my thoughts on it go unsaid. Uh, so yeah, if you're new here, welcome back to my channel, Tay the Writer Foodie. On this channel, I mostly read books and I talk about my thoughts regarding Christianity, the current social/political climate, though that's less so. But mostly history, literature, everything in between. I mostly read books as well. But today, I thought I'd tackle Nolan's film. As a literary student, I find it pretty important to engage with not just the source material, but also engaging with. This is a bit shaky. I'm just gonna angle that up a bit. Sort of. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, as I was saying, as a literary student, I find it very interesting and insightful to not only engage with the source material at hand, which is Homer's The Odyssey, but also to engage with adaptations of said source material, which includes Nolan's film. And I know that there's been a lot of divisiveness, a lot of takes, a lot of controversy going, here, there, and I will forewarn you, I'm gonna spit some hot takes. You're not gonna like me for some of them. If you want to walk away, that's fine. If you want to stay, cool. So full disclosure, I did not read the entirety of this book before going to go watch Nolan's film. I booked the showing on a whim, because it was vaguely fiscally responsible of me at the time, and I just felt like going to go see it so that I could watch it, and if I hated it, hate on it properly, and give it the due. Beforehand, however, I read some of The Odyssey, 2 translations to be exact. I read the one that is closest to, I suppose, Homer's vision. Closest to the original text of The Odyssey. And that was Richmond Lattimore's translation, if I remember correctly. I'm gonna look up his name, just so. Just so I remember this correctly. Yes, Richmond Lattimore's Odyssey. It's praised for its fidelity to the ancient Homeric Greek. And then I read the inspiration, as Nolan cites it, his inspiration that he took ideas for this adaptation. I'm trying to convey this properly, and it's really, really hard. This first part is is mostly unscripted. So, right. So, the second translation that I read was, Emily Wilson's translation, and Christopher Nolan, he has cited that he took a lot of inspiration from Wilson's translation of the Odyssey for this particular adaptation. It is important to note that, one, not long after the film came out, Emily Wilson slammed the adaptation, saying that she would never come up with whatever that was. I don't entirely believe her, but make of that what you will. Also, two, um, what was my second thought? um, yeah, so there was obviously the slamming of the Nolan's adaptation by Emily Wilson. Um, Second is that one, uh, okay, so Wilson, what her approach with this particular translation was making it more accessible for a modern audience. She didn't exactly agree with, say the translations of Lattimore, um, in which I don't know. The general vibe that I got was that she felt it was just too complicated. God forbid someone, treat the Odyssey, arguably one of the most impactful texts in the Western literary canon, with the respect it deserves. So yeah, I read the opening scenes of both translations, so Lattimore's and Wilson's, and God, I've got to tell you, yeah, Emily Wilson's is bad. It's bad. Um, it was definitely, true to her vision, and that she wanted to make it accessible to a modern audience. Which, I, come on, treat the material with a little respect. It felt too simplistic. Emily Wilson's translation, at least the opening scene that I read, talks to me like I have the IQ of a wet paper towel, whereas Lattimore's translation actually feels like it sits more on my IQ, my actual IQ. Don't blame me. I'm autistic and a literary scholar. So God forbid I be smart at what I do. Uh, but yeah, so that's my basic summary of those two opening scenes. Should I have read more? Yes, but again, I booked the showing of this movie on a whim, and I wanted the really comfy recliner seats because my theory was that if I'm gonna watch a terrible movie, I might as well do it in style and be comfortable. So I did, and it did not improve my experience of said movie. I was a heck of a lot more comfortable. The seats reclined. That's wonderful. But yeah, so I did not have time to read the entirety of the Odyssey. But as you can see, I got on my shelf right here. Do I plan to read it in future? Absolutely. And if I can, maybe one day I will give a, pretty, maybe a little bit more of a nuanced take. That's a loaded statement. That's a really loaded statement. But, I do consider this, and it is considered to be arguably one of the most impactful books in Western literary canon. But I have read the Iliad. It's fantastic. I love it. So yeah, now without further ado, now that I've already, given my introduction and, whatnot, okay, so typically for film reviews, I would write a Substack post. I will link my my Substack page in my description. I've got lots of film and TV reviews, and even just some articles about random things that I just think of up like on the fly. Um, uh, but I decided not to write a Substack post because, as I said, with a film of this scope and this magnitude, I had to make a video about it, and it's gonna be long, it's gonna be a doozy. Not that a Substack post wouldn't do it justice, but I typically like to keep my Substack posts to about like 600 words max. It's not terribly long. And I wanted to do, I wanted to do justice to the film. I wanted to give it the time of day that it deserves, as terrible as I find the movie, and I'll explain why. I felt a full scripted video would give me a lot more time to deep dive into the film, its similarities and differences to the source material, my comparisons with other adaptations of the source material, and, what little praise I have for the film, combined with the multitude of issues that I have with said film. I need to note, before we go ahead, I don't tolerate any hate comments. I will swiftly block and report them. I understand that there are issues with this film, primarily the casting, and that is completely fine. I will highlight said issues. You may not like me for said issues that I have with the casting, including a few notable controversial casts. You might not like me. That's completely fine. I will, however, in my comments, appreciate nuanced disagreements. Nuanced disagreements do not include these parameters. They do not include calling me a bigot, calling me a hater, or any other names you feel like calling me under the sun. I don't appreciate it. I will swiftly block and report you. Even though YouTube won't do anything, really, because YouTube sucks at content guidelines. But that is the nature of the video that we're going to be doing today. Also, before we go ahead, I'll be mentioning some pretty ugly topics such as violence, murder, rape, and body horror, so be forewarned. I tried not to go super deep into these topics because I know YouTube content guidelines can be a little, well, like I said, they suck. They suck. They allow some things to pass that arguably shouldn't pass, and then other things just, get, absolutely munted on the internet. It's a strange place. The internet is strange. So, with that, let us dive into Christopher Nolan's 2026 film, The Odyssey. I have aptly named this title, Section 1, The Premise. A little bit of background, Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey came out this year, around June or July, if I remember correctly. It's based on the epic poem of the same name, by whom we assume to be the poet Homer. Although it has been somewhat debated as to the authorship of the Odyssey, and I believe this is the same for the Iliad, the poem was likely composed around the 8th century BC. I say likely because that's not exact. Also, for full disclosure, all of this information I got off was Wikipedia. Yes, I am a literary student. Do I care about putting footnotes in my video or any kind of academic, peer-reviewed thing? No. This is not going to be a full video essay. This is just, I'm just talking. I'm just talking to talk because I'm delivering a take. I'm not making a whole video essay where I have to show my academic prowess. So, no, I'm not going to be all of the biographical information that you're seeing about literally anything regarding the movie or the original poem or the adaptations or, just generally anything. Most of that, all from Wikipedia. No, I will not elaborate as to why I used only that. Wait, actually, I did just elaborate. That was a slip of the tongue. I did just elaborate as to why I wouldn't, go full academia on it. But, okay. So, yeah, we have our background, the epic poem, the Odyssey, probably authored by Homer, probably composed around the 8th century BC. And it's just because it's been told over thousands of years. So that's why the authorship and the date is not exact. And again, I do believe this is the same for the Iliad, and that it's quite highly contested as to who wrote it. I will also say that Nolan took elements from Virgil's The Aeneid, I am probably mispronouncing that. I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. Um, but yes, he did take quite a lot of elements from the Aeneid, um, for the purposes to round out his adaptation. I don't really think he needed it, especially because it leads to a casting that I'm not happy with, for whatever reason. And yeah, I will get into that. I will get into that. I promise you. But yeah, okay. So we're gonna keep going. So the Odyssey, meaning the epic poem, chronicles the journey of Odysseus, king of Ithaca, on his way home from the Trojan War, an arduous journey which takes around 20 years. 10 in the war against the Trojans and 10 for the journey home. This journey is split into 24 books. Odysseus is also known by his Latin variant Ulysses, though the name of Odysseus remains the most recognizable in the English literary canon. During the journey in question, Odysseus faces some very angry members of the Greek pantheon, fights monsters, encounters a witch, makes some pretty awful decisions, is trapped on an island for 7 years with a goddess, and finally makes it home to his loyal, loving wife Penelope and son Telemachus, after butchering the 108 suitors who had been competing for Penelope's hand in marriage. And, altogether, the original story wraps up quite nicely. Nice little, hero's journey home, sort of. Except Odysseus does some really, really questionable things that don't exactly make him a hero, but, that's not quite the reason. I'm not adding an addendum about that in this video. I'm absolutely not. Because that's a whole other kind of topic that we could get into about the characterization of Odysseus in the original work. But I will be, getting into the characterization of Odysseus in the movie and in other adaptations as well. So, Nolan's Odyssey follows the same plot, more or less, for all its faults, which we'll explore later in the video. It happens to be a fairly accurate adaptation of the source material, though it does follow a non-linear timeline, in that the events are all disjointed and kind of thrown everywhere. I'm not sure why Nolan likes to do this, but it's really annoying, and it greatly hampered my enjoyment of the watch. I don't like a disjointed narrative. I prefer a more linear structure. So the only other adaptation that I know of the Odyssey that I have seen nearly in full is Epic the Musical, which I will explore later in this video and compare it to Nolan's Odyssey. I will also compare the events of the Trojan War that are depicted in the film Troy from 2004, which stars Brad Pitt. And I will be comparing that as well to Nolan's Odyssey, at least the elements of the Trojan War that are shown in Nolan's Odyssey. So, we're going to get into the similarities and differences between Nolan's Odyssey and Homer's Odyssey. Warning ahead, there's going to be heavy spoilers for both the plots of the original work by Homer and Nolan's Odyssey. The original work by Homer, you should have read it already. If you didn't read it in high school, this book has been out for thousands of years. Come on. Get with the program, people. You should have read it. Or at least snippets. Granted, I'm not one to talk. I did read the opening scene like a couple of hours before I went to go see the film. So I'm not one to judge, but I was homeschooled. We didn't really explore it. Our focus was history and other things. But okay, section 2, we have similarities and differences. The only notable differences to the plot of Nolan's adaptation is the film completely acts as the original scene, the opening scenes of the original work, for the most part. I will say for the most part. So instead of Athena going in disguise to Telemachus, and prompting him to seek out what's happened to his father Odysseus, and then it leads to if you're familiar with the original work, the meeting with Menelaus. The scene that replaces it is a scene, highlighting the suitors' greed. They're drinking and dining lavishly. They're basically eating poor Penelope and poor Telemachus out of house and home. While the Queen of Ithaca, Penelope, weaves a burial shroud for Odysseus's early father, Laertes? I think that's how you pronounce it. I could be wrong. Another difference is that Menelaus, or Menelaus, I honestly don't know how to go about pronouncing that. I've heard it both ways, Menelaus and Menelaus. But yeah, in this film, he's played by John Bernthal, and I'll explain the issue that I have with his casting later, and his characterization, because it's quite poor, but I'll get into that later. He does not mention that he met a shape-shifting god known as the Old Man of the Sea. In the book, he does say that, but in the movie, he does not. What happens is, quite a drawn-out scene where, they go hunting and the costumes are terrible, which I will also partially get into that, about how bad the costumes are. But yeah, it's a very drawn-out scene where, it basically kind of ends the same way as the original did, where Menelaus is like, oh, well, I didn't see nothing, and then, like, I actually no, it doesn't, because if I remember correctly, the original work actually has Menelaus, again, he says he met the Old Man of the Sea, and, Old Man of the Sea said something about, Odie being on, someone's island, and I don't remember if he mentions Calypso by name, or, the island of Augia, I think it's called. But all that aside, so Matt Damon's Odysseus, there's a big issue with that casting. First of all, whoa, I will again talk about that later. He leaves Calypso's island. He simply lands on the shores of Ithaca after the sea destroys the raft he built. The thing is that in the original work, it's quite different. He actually meets this group of, like, people called the Phaeacians. I don't think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. This act, the wrecking of the raft and him just landing on the shores of Ithaca, it's assumed to be Poseidon, although, the god of the waves, Poseidon. Although who would know, given the event basically presents as just an average freak storm. Again, I will tackle this issue later in the video, how the film feels bereft of the gods and their influence upon the events of the Odyssey, even though Circe and Calypso, they both feature in the film. Another difference is the encounter with Polyphemus, the Cyclops. There is no Lotus Eaters, but there is the Lotus on Calypso's island. She basically drugs him into staying, and no tricking of Polyphemus, and the nobody scene is nowhere to be found. And I will also explain my issue with this, about how much they cut from that scene, and how important it is that they should have kept the nobody scene. If you know what I'm talking about, it's a very important scene in Odysseus' characterization, and it shows us exactly what kind of person he is. The cleverness, the, ruthlessness, I'm making an epic reference there. I'm making an epic musical reference there. I love Epic. and I will explain why I love it so much later on in this video. Yeah, so Odysseus leaving Calypso's island is, like, it's very different. So in the original work, Hermes, the messenger god, he negotiates Odysseus' release at the behest of Athena and Zeus. Whereas in Nolan's adaptation, Calypso takes pity on him and instructs him to make the raft that will take him to Ithaca. That's stupid. I find that change so stupid. And yeah, I also have issues with Calypso's characterization and her casting. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about that too. The side plot with Xenon and his deception of the Trojans also doesn't exist in the original text, as Homer doesn't mention it at all. I said earlier in this video that Nolan took a lot of inspiration from Virgil's The Aeneid. And yeah, his role in the story is the same as in Nolan's adaptation. So yeah, that was lifted straight from the Aeneid and just stuck into the Odyssey. Like, that makes sense. It's two different authors, and as far as I'm concerned, both stories were written quite a long while apart. I'm not sure why, but they were. So there's also no exile for Penelope and Odysseus at the end of Homer's Odyssey. This is in Nolan's Odyssey. That was, this is completely a fabricated change that Nolan made for the ending of his film. This is not in Homer's Odyssey. So basically there's a scene in, the underworld, which is, it's supposed to be, like, if for whatever reason, the scene is quite dumbed down, quite a bit, and there's a certain rule that scene breaks in storytelling, and I will explain that later. It's so okay. So basically, in said scene, so it's the underworld scene where they're going to the underworld, and Odysseus gets all this information, and basically, I forget who tells him. Someone tells him, and I think it's the prophet Tiresias, tells him that to honor his men, when he gets back to Ithaca, he must sail to the proverbial edge of the world and, offer sacrifices to, to give them peace, to give his fallen men peace. And yeah, at the end of the film, Penelope and Odysseus, they set off into the sunset to go and make those sacrifices and usher them into the afterlife. I don't know why this choice was made. It's a stupid choice. It is a stupid choice. And I'm gonna go a tiny bit further into that later on again. So there's also no scene with Penelope's test to prove that the man in disguise is Odysseus, with the whole wedding bed being carved from the tree. That happens in Epic the Musical, though. I love the musical number that takes place around that particular test. It's a beautiful music number, absolutely gorgeous. It's the last musical number in Epic the Musical. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous musical number. Rather in place of it, Odysseus' disguise is revealed when he wins Penelope's challenges. The bow, stringing the bow and shooting through the 12 axes. Yeah, that challenge. So that's when he's, revealed. There's no, wedding bed carved from tree test. Which actually, it kind of ruins a lot of, Odysseus and Penelope's relationship. And it kind of, the removal of that scene strips a lot of the meaning, of their relationship and how just significant it is for the two of them and how that contributes to Odysseus' character. Actually, that scene completely ruins that. Because he's more than just, brains and strength and divine blessing. He's very deeply devoted to his wife and son. Yeah, so those are just a few differences. I could get into more, but that would probably make this video about 10 times longer than it needs to be. It's honestly long as it is. Now for similarities, the film and the original work share the event with the Lystragonians, the cannibal giants who murder several of Odysseus' men. The sirens are also there, as well as the detail of plugging the ears with beeswax, except in the film it's just called wax. I have no issue with this. really, it's stupid. Um, I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure why they just called it wax. But yeah, it's a tiny little thing that that altogether I don't care about. Odysseus is also tied to the masks per the original story. There's a great bit of sound design in the scene that I love, and I will talk about it later in the video. The scenes with the swineherd Emmaus. I think it's Emmaus or Eumaeus. They're mostly accurate to the source material, but there's also a few scenes that are there, particularly in the Ithaca scenes, to manufacture narrative tension. And I will also get into this issue later. That it's, a bit contrived. But the ending works mostly the same, with the difference between being Telemachus hanging female slaves in the original work after they were violated by the suitors. Though I suppose with the slightly woke bent that they were taking with this movie, female slaves being murdered probably wouldn't have won many brownie points with the liberals. I mostly wrote that in as a jab to the liberals, who were all over this movie. Gosh, you guys were all over this movie. You're insufferable and annoying. There are little touches that I like very much in terms of accuracy of the source material. One of the female servants, she recognizes Odysseus from a scar in his leg. There's Odie and Telemachus, they hide the weapons from the suitors. There's also one particular scene, and it's this small thing. I didn't know that this was in the original source material until I looked it up. Antinous throws a footstool at Odysseus as he's disguised as a beggar. It's such a small detail. It's honestly kind of absurd when I think about it, but it's like absurd in like a funny way. Even though it's meant to be derogatory. But I do genuinely love that detail. It's still, it does speak of at least some close attention to the source material to add that as a small footnote in the movie, to add that as a little scene, because I feel that it shows Antinous's, like, his disdain towards people that he views as lower than him, even though he's really throwing footstool at the king of Ithaca, except he doesn't know it yet. But it's so good. Gosh, I am burping a lot. My apologies. And then there's a very lovely scene where Odysseus' dog, Argos, very old in the movie, he sees him through his disguise and finally passes away. I didn't like the scene. I can appreciate it for its sentimentality, but I felt nothing. I felt nothing watching the scene because I don't think that we got enough of a build-up in the film for us to appreciate Argos's role in the story. We get, one flashback scene with him as a puppy, and it's ridiculous, and it's clearly meant to farm sentimentality, and I always cry when the dog dies. I always cry. Not this time. I felt nothing. Nothing. Not a shred. Not a shred. Nothing. Zero zilch nada. I felt nothing. Which is sad, because I wanted to feel something and I didn't. So either it's an issue, like what I said, with not enough build-up, or I'm a heartless monster. But then again, I cry every time the dog dies in every other film. Marley and Me, I was an incoherent wreck. Hatchie, literally anytime I thought the dog would die, or the dog did die in literally any other film that I've watched with a dog, I've been sad. Not this time. Not this time. Feel free to call me a heartless monster, if you will, for not sobbing my guts out at a dog that we've had no build-up for, but all that aside, I'm gonna leave it. Again, as I mentioned earlier, Nolan's Odyssey follows a lot of the same story beats. albeit with some difference for creative license. I will explain my issues with how much creative license is taken in this film, and how much it does the narrative a grave disservice. Section 3. Oh, we are halfway through. Okay, so I want to give the positives first, because I want to compliment Sandwich, I want to be nice. And at least be a little lenient to the film before I dive into the negatives, of which there are many. First positive, I highlight what I highlighted earlier, and that was the sound design during the siren scene. I said I was going to talk about this. Everyone puts wax in their ears to plug the noise, save for Odysseus, who opts to be tied to the mast because, he wants to hear the siren song because he's an idiot. Except for most other times. But just the scene, it's not the brightest tool in the shed. Or the sharpest tool in the shed. I think that's the saying. He does not act like the sharpest tool in the shed in this scene. So, I want to hear the siren song. So they tie him to the mast. And when the wax is put in, the sound is muffled, as if you were plugging your ears. And it's such a good use of a narrative device to establish a degree of tension, because these are sirens. They're not, part of your world. They are not Jodie Benson from The Little Mermaid. They're terrifying and they will eat you. They're the, if you've ever watched, Pirates of the Caribbean, it's that, oh god, what's the movie called? It's the one, if I remember correctly, with I want to say the Fountain of Youth. It's the one with Blackbeard, I think. And if I remember correctly, it is that one. I forget exactly what it's called. I think it's On Stranger Tides, but I could be wrong. It's not At World's End, but I think it's On Stranger Tides, but I could be wrong. Please feel free to correct me if I said the wrong title for the movie. But yeah, those are, they are called mermaids, I think, in the movie. It has been a really long time since I've watched that movie, but it's such a good movie. But yeah, in that particular Pirates of the Caribbean film, they are sirens. They lure sailors in with their song, and then they kind of, when the sailors lean over the side, they grab them and drag them down to the depths, and, it's presumed they eat them or something. It's scary. It's scary. These bitches be scary. Be scary. Be very, very scary. So also with that scene, we see what happens when someone takes out the wax, hears the sirens, and decides to swim towards them. And it's also a great use of tension to understate just how dangerous these creatures are. As I said, they lure people with their song, and it's apparently a very, hypnotizing song. Probably just imagine, one of the most beautiful musical pieces you've ever heard in your entire life, when it comes to music. And, you should have something vaguely close to what a siren song sounds like. Another positive would be the scene with Polyphemus. Again, it's not accurate to the source material, and it does do away with a great deal of the characterization that is needed to understand Odysseus as a character. It is a terrifying scene. I did get jump scared. And the scale and size of the creature very much adds to that. He's like tall as frick. He's so tall. The Cyclops is so tall, and it's ridiculously scary. And arguably, the character of the Cyclops doesn't even really do much in this particular version. But I think that's about as much as we need. I did feel genuine nervousness with that scene, for like a couple of story beats, and then it was, and then it was just like, oh, well, it's nothing like what I imagined it would be. Okay, another positive, rather just something absolutely hilarious, is the scene where the gates to Troy open. So this is after they bring in the Trojan horse, and they slaughter a bunch of guards and open the gates. Agamemnon just walks in, surveys his face for 10 full seconds in head-to-toe armor. This armor is stupid. It looks so dumb. It is the dumbest looking piece of armor I think I've ever seen in my life. But this guy, bro, just walks in, surveys the space for 10 full seconds, just full on aura farming, and it looks awesome. It looks so awesome, but it is so stupid. It's so stupid because the armor is god awful. It looks like someone, you know, it looks like someone took some, botched 3D printed design of like a Roman centurion's like armor, and added some cool vertebrae bones on the back, and just painted it black and stuck it on the guy who plays Agamemnon and said, "Here, stand in the space for 10 full seconds, just walk in, stare around at the space, just aura farm, the audience is gonna love it." I found it funny. It's funny, it's not terrifying, it's funny. It also just feels like something Agamemnon would 1000% do. And I both hate and love the creative choice, because, yeah, again, the armor is dumb, but the execution of the scene is actually really cool. Speaking of Agamemnon, I also like how they showed us the circumstances that led to his death, as well as the sheer rage of his wife, Clytemnestra, at their daughter Iphigenia's sacrifice by Agamemnon for good winds to Troy. It very much feels like Stannis in Game of Thrones sacrificing his daughter. It very much kind of echoes that. And the sheer rage that Clytemnestra has when she gets onto the bed and she stabs Agamemnon. It is wow, like that's almost female rage personified. She is angry. She's so angry, and just like and when because Agamemnon talks about this later when he's in the underworld, he basically kind of bemoans his fate in that he was welcomed home with like singing and dancing and flowers everywhere. Welcome home, baby, and they butter him up, and then and he's laying on the bed, and his wife gets on the bed, and she stabs the crud out of him, and it's awesome. It's awesome. I love it. But yeah, I was honestly thinking of that one song. He had it coming. He had it coming. He only had himself to. So I think it's the song from Chicago. The musical. He absolutely deserved that. He absolutely deserved that. I mean, granted, the Greeks were so superstitious then. And, human sacrifice was a thing. But still, a child. He deserved that. His own kid. He absolutely deserved to kick the bucket for that one. Another positive, I love the ending of the film for the most part. It's really only the fight scenes that I loved at the ending. I got a jump scare when the arrow went into the guy's throat. But the fight scene felt well choreographed and intense. I also really liked the casting of Robert Pattinson as Antinous, although there were some points where his voice work wasn't, the best. But he came across as menacing enough for the part, and I was okay with that. I was also okay with the casting of Tom Holland as Telemachus, though him saying mom and dad in a supposedly non-American film set in the past where people didn't use those semi-informal terms for mother and father it was really annoying. It was really annoying, and it took me very much out of the story, like immersion-wise. I also didn't mind Himesh Patel's casting as Eurylochus. It was okay, aside from a minor weapons handling gripe, and I will explain that later. He was okay. Also we had the minor characters, Helen, Agamemnon, Emmaus, even the servant girl, played by Mia Goth. All were well casted and acted well enough with the material they were given. Section 4. Take a drink of water, because this is gonna be a doozy. Where do I start? Where exactly do I start? I mentioned earlier that I don't like the ending of this film. Okay, so go back a bit. Alright, so this is section 4. This is negatives of Nolan's Odyssey. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, I don't like the ending of this film, and for good reason. Antinous is cowardly at the end. Although, I mean, I suppose it would make sense for his character, but I really didn't like it. I saw a TikTok parody video where, some guy was, like, standing in the corner going, you guys, get the weapons, you guys! And then I watched the Odyssey later, and I'm like, yeah, that's exactly how it went down. Because you see Robert Pattinson just cowering behind a pillar, and he's like, get the weapons! Get the weapons! And it's really stupid. It's really stupid. There's also no straight up massacre of the suitors with the help of Athena and Telemachus. It's really just Odysseus soloing all of them, while Telemachus fights some idiot because he got into the weapons locker and was just throwing stuff down to the men. Again, while Antinous is in the corner shouting, you guys, get the weapons! It's stupid. In the scene, Odysseus gets hit with at least 5 arrows that are in places that should kill him because plot armor, but because plot armor, he doesn't die. I swore I saw an arrow that looked like it was kind of in that area that might be lung adjacent. That's stupid. That's stupid. Plot armor. Plot armor protected him too much in that scene. In what world? In what world? He got hit by 5 arrows that should have killed him. And last I remember, I don't think he was wearing armor. I don't think he was. Worse still, because of a plot point set up earlier in the film, as I said, Odysseus simply must go off somewhere and pay tribute to his men, and in doing so, he decides to take the wife and leave their incredibly inexperienced son to rule a land that's practically bankrupt because the suitors are greedy and they suck. Again, they were eating Penelope and Telemachus out of house and home because they were abusing the law of hospitality. And I will talk about how much they speak about the law of hospitality, Zeus's law. They preach it like it's bloody gospel, and it's really annoying. And I will explain my slight issue with that, even though I know it's a staple of Greek culture. There's also no attempted revenge on the suitors' family from the suitors' families, with Athena intervening and preventing bloodshed, like there is in Homer's Odyssey. No hanging of the used servant girls either by Telemachus, although perhaps that's for the best, as it might leave a sour taste with the audience. I did make a joke about the liberals earlier. I stand by that joke. Because they were taking a woke bet with this movie, especially with taking inspiration from Wilson's translation. But, yeah, it would probably leave a sour taste with the audience. But I suppose it would also show, how horrid it was for women back then, because they basically didn't have many rights. Not many. The biggest glaring issue is that the story seems devoid of the Greek pantheon. Look, I've heard a lot of complaints about this. I'm by far not the first to add to said complaints, and I will not be the last. Every phenomenon in nature that could happen as part of the god's influence is just that. It's just nature. The storm feels like every other freak storm. The thunder just feels like thunder. The only members of the mythological who are given parts in the story are Circe, Calypso, and Athena. I'm still not sure if Athena was Athena in the story, or she's just meant to be a rep of Odie's guilt for murdering the priestess in Troy, who also has the same form. They're both played by Zendaya. For the intents and purposes of this deep dive, I'm going with this girl not actually being Athena, but rather just being a figment of Odie's imagination, and yeah, again, a manifestation of his guilt. Circe comes across as a washed-up old hag. I know that sounds mean. I'm not hating on the actress, Samantha Morton, who played her. Her characterization is poor, though. She's terrified of men. She's not young and beautiful and is a doctress who, lures people in, with, promises of food and rest, like Odysseus' men and stuff, and, Calypso, far too sympathetic for a goddess who supposedly trapped my guy Odie on an island for 7 years, and also there's, some implied, I don't know whether this is in the text or in certain adaptations, but it is implied that there was some sexual assault going on. Calypso being the inflictor upon Odysseus. And it's, it's pretty ugly to think about. But there's not even really much of that necessarily in the movie. That's not particularly very well touched on. Again, she encourages him to leave in Nolan's Odyssey, which is a change from the source material. Another big issue I have is the sound design / composing of the film score. Except for the scene of the sirens, the soundtrack is horrid, and I don't know if it was because I watched it in the theater or not, but it does not work well, and it feels way too loud. More like just noise. Upon discovering that composer Ludwig Göransson, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, was responsible for this noise, I was disappointed. Very disappointed. I love his works generally. Look, he's a great composer, and I think it was because he was paired with a different director with a completely different tonal subject than I am normally used to seeing his works in. I have really only seen his music in 2 other notable films, and that was Black Panther and Sinners, and those were both African-centered. So I think his prowess came out a lot more when scoring for those films. But with the Odyssey, because and this is just my take, because he's paired with Nolan, and it is for all intents and purposes, it's a very Western-ish setting, or at least Western adjacent, because the Odyssey is critical to the Western literary canon. It's terrible. The score is awful. Look, my bad. I'm hoping that my opinion will change if I ever rewatch The Odyssey on a streaming service, although that's unlikely because I hated this movie, so I don't think I'll ever touch it with a 10-foot pole again. Look, I don't know. Again, I don't know if it's because I watched it in the theater or not that I found it terrible. I love going to movie theaters. They seem to be getting louder and louder these days, and I'm autistic. I get overstimulated very, very quickly. And I ended up having to wear my set of loop earplugs for almost the entire movie, which is actually really telling. And I did also have to watch... I did also have to have in my loop earplugs for almost the entirety of watching Masters of the Universe a couple months back with my fiance, which is it's really telling, and it very much hampers my experience of the film when I have to keep my earplugs in because I'm getting blasted by noise. It's just noise. I don't know if they're getting louder these days. It feels like everything's getting louder these days. I've also had this complaint of my church in particular. It's just louder. I don't know why everything is louder these days, but it is. Okay. I'm gonna get to the gripe that you all have been waiting for, that I have forewarned you about, and it's the casting. I know you're gonna say, bleh, she's gonna bring up Black Helen of Troy. I don't care. I don't care. When I say I don't care about the casting. Is the characterization poor? Yes. Do I care about the fact that they casted Lupita Nyong'o? No. I don't. I genuinely don't care. She's actually an objectively beautiful woman, and a pretty great actress to boot, so I don't mind. My actual gripe, I also know you're gonna say, blech, she's gonna bring up Elliot Page's Xenon, and to you I say quite a few things. One, you were sufficiently prepared for this. I let you know in the video earlier that I would bring up the issue that I have with the casting of this film. And I implied that I was going to talk about this. Two, I know that some of the radical woke left are going to inevitably find this video and tear me a new one in the comments for this, And I say, you can go kick rocks because I've got opinions and I'm not afraid to share them. 3, it's Ellen Page, not Elliot. She's claiming to be something she's not. She is duping the entire world in the process because she's mentally ill. And the casting director obviously wanted to get woke brownie points and controversy, and it worked. As an addendum to this, I don't agree with the LGBT whatever agenda, because it's just that, it's an agenda. And it confuses and it harms people. Also, if you've been on my channel for any amount of time, you'll have likely gathered that I am a Christian. And as such, on that metric alone, and from what I know to be true in the scriptures, I will make that very clear that I don't agree with it. And I don't appreciate the way that they insist on roping us all into their delusion, for lack of a better word. You could say the same thing about me. You could say the exact same thing, that I am roping you into my delusion. Not the same thing, though. Not the same thing, and I'll tell you why. Is that I would never force anyone on my channel to accept Christ. I never will. One of my main goals with this channel is to share my love for Jesus, to share my love for God, and share what he's done for me in my life, and just how beautifully that has manifested in my life. If you don't like that, then that's fine. I aim to talk about Christ very, very openly on this channel. And look, no skin off my back if you want to walk away. Back to the topic at hand. Now that we've done away with that heavy hitter, we're going back to the casting. Let's talk about the less controversial ones that don't sit right with me. First up on the chopping block, we've got Matt Damon as Odysseus. Is a big fan of 2004's Troy. I love Sean Bean as Odysseus. Even in just a few small scenes with the character, we see his wit, his strength, and the way that only he can negotiate with Brad Pitt's Achilles. This also happens quite a lot in the Iliad. He's kind of the man to go to when talking to Achilles, because Achilles is a whiny little bish, and he's petty, and he, for lack of a better word, he's kind of spoiled. So it takes a lot to talk him down from one of his tantrums, and really only Odysseus can kind of do that. On that note, you can say what you will about Brad Pitt as a person, but I believe he's a brilliant actor, and in my book, it reflects nothing on his acting ability, the fallout with his ex-wife, Angelina Jolie. But yeah, back to Sean Bean's portrayal. It somewhat even nails the broad-shouldered look that Odysseus is said to have in the Iliad, because he's constantly referred to in the text as, having, broad shoulders and stuff. No hate to Matt Damon and whatever workout diet routine he tried to do for Odie, but he doesn't look the part. And also, the American accent is grating and nauseating in a movie supposedly set not in the American, West, Western as we know it. At least Bean has a British accent as Odysseus, which is not much better, but it is far more desirable for a movie like this than your average American accent. Next up, Anne Hathaway as Penelope. I really, really wanted to like this casting. I tried to, but she's a terrible Penelope. A lot of her character seems so forced. She's very mean to Telemachus for whatever reason. We're supposed to realize that she cares for Telemachus. It doesn't come across that way at all in the script. We're not supposed to see her berating him so harshly because he wants to actually do something about the suitors that are eating them out of house and home. And yeah, again, I'm going to bring up the law of hospitality. As an addendum here, I got really tired of the way that they would constantly spout this law like it was gospel. I imagine myself in the theater playing a drinking game every time they said it. I should actually try that game, although I worry that I would end up either very tipsy or properly drunk. And I know you're going to tell me in the comments that Zeus's law of hospitality was interwoven into the core of Greek society, and you are absolutely right. I can acknowledge that and still complain about how often it's talked about, because it's ridiculous. We don't need to hear it every other scene. Show us. Don't tell us. Stop telling us, Nolan. Stop telling us, buddy. You have one job with this movie. And I'm mad about how you handled show don't tell. You just kept telling us details. You just kept telling us things. You weren't showing us. And that's a massive issue I have with this movie. Third up, Zendaya as Athena, or not Athena, or unnamed Trojan priestess of Athena. I don't know what to call her. I still think she's, a rep on Odie's guilt. I have heard a lot of takes. I've heard a lot of takes on this, on whether it's a rep on Odie's guilt, a figment of his imagination, or it's actually Athena taking the form of the priestess that he slaughtered. Yeah, I still believe it's Odie's guilt, because she's severely limited in this story. Whereas in, say the Iliad, she absurdly favors this guy. She favors him so much that in the funeral games for Patroclus, Odysseus wins a foot race, not because on his own merit, but because she helps him. She loves this guy. She loves this guy. She adores him about as much as she also adores Achilles. And, there's certain other, heroes in the Trojan War. But Odysseus, she loves this guy. And, Athena in this movie is very, very limited. And it's sad. And fourth up, sorry to bring up Ellen Page again, but I'm going to. Her casting is horrid as Sinon. In the one scene where Sinon is shown to be alive and casting his deception on the Trojans, she looks constipated. I saw a Collider article not too long ago glazing the absolute heck out of her facial expressions and stuff, and I'm like, no. I had to have a laugh, because in what world is she a good actress? Was there not much direction, or does she not know what to do with her face? Yeah, I hated it. Fifth, Samantha Morton as the goddess Circe. Like I said, she comes across as more just a washed up old hag. She's too weak, she's too scared, she's not cunning or seductive enough, she's definitely not beautiful. She's older, and she's terrified of men, and she's easily convinced by this weird simpy speech from Odysseus saying, I want to go home because I miss everybody back home. I miss my wife, I miss my son. And it's pathetic. We are supposed to understand how she could lure Odysseus' men into her home. Sixth, we have Charlize Theron as the goddess Calypso, also not cunning or seductive enough. She looks way too old for the role. Again, we're supposed to understand how Odysseus could not fight her. How he was motivated to stay on the island despite sitting on the beach every day and sobbing his guts out in the original story. But we are supposed to understand that. We do not. She's too sympathetic. Seventh and final, we've got John Bernthal as Menelaus. I said this earlier, I have an issue with this casting. He really just plays a version of Frank Castle that he's in every movie these days. I love Frank Castle from the MCU. I absolutely love him. He's a great, very compelling character, but I feel like he's been typecasted a little bit, just a tad. And it very much cuts into my impression of him whenever I see him on screen, not playing Frank. I just still think he's playing Frank because the voice, he does nothing to change it, and there's no real acting work there to in whatever way differentiate whatever character he's playing, and this Case Menelaus from, say, Frank Castle. Um, I don't think he knows how to diversify his range. Now for my smaller gripes, one, the writing is garbage. I've heard quite a few people say that Christopher Nolan's brother, Jonathan Nolan, that he wrote the best of Christopher's films, and when comparing the writing of, say, The Dark Knight to The Odyssey, it's clear which film is clearly better, even if The Dark Knight, being a comic book film, didn't quite get its day in the sun, which it should have, considering it had some of the best performances in a comic book movie of all time, notwithstanding, particularly Heath Ledger as the Joker. R.I.P. to Heath Ledger. He seemed like a, pretty good actor, I can't say for his personality. But, what a shame, honestly. But yeah, the Dark Knight trilogy is generally a amazing movie. The award peeps, they hate comic book movies. It's like they all have a little, Martin Scorsese on their shoulders whispering, comic book movies suck, and that they should listen to Tiny Martin because he happened to make an overrated mafia movie that film bros all idolize like God himself made the movie. Mind you, said overrated mafia movie got parodied in a Disney movie from 2016. That would be Zootopia. That's what the world has come to, that Disney parodied The Godfather. And it was funny. And I hate The Godfather, as Peter Griffin says in Family Guy, it insists upon itself. I'm not gonna, throw, did Martin Scorsese make The Godfather? You know what? Now I'm mixed on that. Did he actually? You know what? I'm gonna look that up. Oh no! So that was Francis Ford Coppola. Okay. Right. So I butchered that part of the script. That's my bad. I should have. But he almost directed The Godfather Part 2. So, ignore that. Ignore that whole diatribe. But still, Martin Scorsese has no respect for comic book movies and how nuanced they can actually be. And I do think that the film awards, people have a little Martin Scorsese on their shoulders telling them comic book movies suck and that they should listen to him because he's an actually good director. And he's not like the Russo brothers who are making comic book movies. Darn comic book movies. Two, the dialogue, I'm going back to back to Nolan's Odyssey. Two, the dialogue. I mentioned earlier that I hated hearing Tom Holland's Telemachus refer to his parents as mom and dad, and I stand by that gripe. Why was this a decision in the script? Also, it diseases constant moping. They make him look and sound like a baby. It's really pathetic. Also, aren't we supposed to kind of root for this guy? And the constant berating of Telemachus by Penelope. We're supposed to understand that she loves her son very deeply. But she's just mean to him. She's so mean to him, and it takes me right out of the story, honestly. Three, and I should have put this at 1 because it pissed me off really badly. The weapons handling. Who was the weapons technician on this movie? They need to be fired. Who? I want to know who was the weapons technician on this movie. Okay, one gripe with the weapons technician. The bow handling. Odysseus draws his bow like this. Like this when he shoots it. He does it at least 2 or 3 times in the movie. That's not how you handle a bow. That is not how you handle a bow. No, absolutely not. Why are you doing it like that? I think he was either doing it this way or this way, but either way, it does not allow for enough draw power, as, doing it this way would. And I'm pretty sure when he draws that bow, he's not doing it properly. Last I checked, I think he's only doing it here. He's not doing it to, here. I don't know who the weapons technician, if that's even quite such a role, who that person responsible for handling and administering, the proper use of the weapons was for this movie. Um, and then he also does the multiple shots in succession thing, so he pulls an Oliver Queen basically, and that's really silly. Even seasoned archers normally wouldn't do that. It's dumb. Also to add, the sword handling, Eurylochus trying to stab the Cyclops with effing reverse grip while the Cyclops is sleeping. Reverse grip, mind you. That's not an economically good way to handle your blade. You do not do that. Reverse grip. Why? It doesn't work unless you're Geralt of Rivia from The Witcher, and it only works when it's Geralt because it's Henry Cavill playing Geralt, and he looks cool while doing it, and it's aura farming, and it's awesome. But why are you doing it? Why are you doing it, Eurylochus? Why are you trying to stab the Cyclops with a reverse grip on your blade? Do you want to die? Okay. Never. You should never, under any circumstances, in the general, pretext of using swords, you should never ever hold a blade or stab something in reverse grip. Eurylochus, you absolute moron. You moron. I hate this. This is one of my biggest gripes with the movie, and it took me right out of the story. It took me right out. Immersion, gone. Then again, my immersion was gone way back in the beginning when they were starting to manufacture narrative tension, and then the sound was just noise. Fourth gripe, I talked a lot about the characterization in this movie being poor. For Odysseus, I did explain this earlier, we don't see enough of his cleverness or his pride, and the nobody scene is a big example of that. Odysseus tricks Polyphemus, the Cyclops, with Lotus in the wine. He falls asleep, and then, they, and then Odysseus blinds him. That doesn't happen in Nolan's film. The scene is so contrived, and I hate it. But the original, it has the drinking with the lotus wine, the Cyclops falling asleep, Eurylochus and his men blinding him, and basically, running full tilt, to which, Polyphemus, calls out to Daddy Poseidon, and Daddy Poseidon, reacts, as per usual, because that's his kid, and, his kid is like, Daddy, help me. And, he also, I did say it was called the nobody scene for a reason, and the reason why I call it that, the reason why it's colloquially called that, is because, Odysseus calls himself nobody, when he's tricking the Cyclops, and then on the way out, Odysseus, in a burst of pride, our favorite idiot king, gives out his name, number, address, and social security number. Yeah, again, to which Polyphemus goes, Daddy Poseidon, help me. And yeah, by cutting the nobody scene, it strips Odysseus of those traits, and we don't understand. Therefore, the movie ventures to tell us he is clever. It does not show us. And again, the show don't tell rule. I also highlighted Circe and Calypso in characterization. They're goddesses. We're supposed to see the full spectrum of their power. We're supposed to see why they're so alluring. We don't see that. They have to be threats. They're not. It really boils down the characters to barely anything. And it's ironic because Homer's original work, sorry, I burped again. The Odyssey, Homer's original work, it is framed by women. Penelope, Athena, Helen to an extent, Circe, Calypso, even Scylla, the many-headed monster. It is so layered in that. And it didn't need Emily Wilson's translation to, make women more nuanced, because women were already quite nuanced in this story as is. But what Nolan's Odyssey does is it very much applies the shallowness of just how shallow these female characters are. Again, the absolute disrespect for the rule of show don't tell. Come on, Nolan, my guy, dude, buddy. You've had one job to write a compelling story, show don't tell. I also highlight, I highlighted earlier that one scene, in the underworld where it's, make the sequences show us, don't tell us that Odysseus is guilty through not Athena. Make the fallout from his actions in Troy show us in the narrative. Like, don't tell us that all the stuff is going to happen to his men. Show us. Show us. Sixth gripe, the full leaning on style over substance. It's egregious. And yeah, does the narrative a real disservice? From completely historically inaccurate costumes that very nearly give Emerald Fennell's adaptation of Wuthering Heights a run for its money, to the glamorous set pieces, to the ridiculous Trojan horse that looks like 3D printed slop. I hate that horse. Why does it look so ugly? It's stylish. It's stylish. I will give Nolan that kind of credence, but none of it matters because the story is weak. It is shallow. You want style that coordinates well with substance? I give you Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. It's stylish. It's beautiful. Glamorous set pieces. Glamorous costumes. I highlight in particular the tower where Victor Frankenstein works on bringing the creature to life. That is such a beautiful set piece. I love it. And yet the style does not detract from the substance of the material, the moral questions that Frankenstein wrestles with as a work of art. And, it's a fantastic film. It's been streaming on Netflix since, I believe, last year. I'd highly recommend you go see Frankenstein, because it's wonderful. But look, we're not talking about Frankenstein more. I might talk about it in another video eventually. We're here to talk about the Odyssey. Now I'm going to be exploring comparisons between Nolan's Adaptation, Epic the Musical, and Troy 2004. Whew. We're on an hour 17. This is long. So, Section 5, comparisons. I said earlier that I was going to compare Nolan's The Odyssey adaptation to other Odyssey adaptations / Odyssey adjacent adaptations. First one on the stand is Epic the Musical, created by Jorge Rivera Herons. I am the first to say that I am a huge fan of Epic. Like, I'm a absolutely massive fan. I will show you this really quick. So the Epic team did a merch drop not long ago, and I was on the pre-order list. I got a Winion! Yes. So they started selling Winion keychains, and I was one of the first to be let known that this was dropping, that this bad boy was dropping. It's so cute. It's so cute. I love Epic. I'm a massive fan of it. It's beautiful. It's moving. It feels like what a true adaptation should be. Basically, it's everything Nolan's Odyssey is not. It is colorful. It is vibrant. There are beautiful musical motifs that explain the characters and their motivations so well. Especially in the case of Odysseus, our main character. The musical motifs that show his character arc are just, they're so well done. And props to Jorge, because he delivers such a fantastic story in solely song format. And my gosh, I haven't seen something done so masterfully in song since watching the pro shot of Hamilton on Disney+. like, again, there's some changes with the source material and Jorge's work, but honestly, those are minor things compared to just how beautiful, how beautifully Jorge respects the core of the story and the moral implications that Odysseus very much wrestles with throughout the throughout the length of the story. Also, the music is so fun to listen to. It's incredibly catchy. It's basically on most music streaming services: Apple, Spotify, YouTube music. I have Thunderbringer, Scylla, The Horse and the Infant, Little Wolf, and Love in Paradise constantly on repeat in my Spotify playlist. It's just so beautiful. I just I love this musical. I love it so much. And apparently it's getting an animated film, an animated musical film from Jerry Bruckheimer. And I hope it blows Nolan's Odyssey out of the freaking water. Because it deserves to. And I also hope that they keep the original cast. Because the original cast are so talented. So talented. Second comparison is Troy 2004, at least the parts that directly affect the events of Nolan's adaptation. There's obviously issues with this adaptation, but I love this movie. I do. I treasure it. I rewatch it sometimes when I'm bored and I'm just, looking for a movie to watch. It's a very familiar, almost comfort movie for me. Um, for its time, it draws on the Iliad, more so than the Odyssey. And, especially for its time, 2004, they're still very much underway with, like the what's name, like the visual effects and whatnot. I firmly believe it belongs up there with Ridley Scott's 2005 film Kingdom of Heaven, which is forever slept on when mentioning great Ridley Scott movies in my book. It's mostly Gladiator that's just talked about. No hate to Gladiator. I love Gladiator. But Kingdom of Heaven is amazing. It's amazing. My biggest issues with Troy would be the characterization of Brad Pitt's Achilles. Also, with Nolan's adaptation, I will add a note that Achilles he's not present at all. If you think about the underworld scene, he's supposed to be in the underworld. He's not. So yeah, big issue there. Kind of. I would have liked to see Achilles whine a little about his fate, because it'd be funny. I do think Brad Pitt brought across some characterization of Achilles from the Iliad, where he's all like whiny and stuff, but it could have been whinier, it could have been pettier, it could have been meaner. There's some story beats that don't line up with the source material. Also, the gods are completely absent. They're kind of just worshipped as very distant deities, not quite influencing the events of the narrative per se. My biggest praise for Troy would be the fight scenes. They're really entertaining to watch. I particularly love the fight scene between Achilles and Hector, which ends tragically if you've either watched the movie or you've read the Iliad. My second biggest praise would be the Trojan horse. Again, I described my gripe with Nolan's 3D printed slop of a horse that looks like it was made of metal. And I also shared praise for Sean Bean's portrayal of Odysseus early on. But the Trojan horse in particular, in the film of Troy, it looks very much like how one would imagine the Trojan horse when, thinking about it. Ironically, again, it's only mentioned briefly in the Odyssey and not in the Iliad. It is mentioned in detail in Virgil's The Aeneid, which also references Sinon's role in the whole Trojan horse deception. The Aeneid vaguely describes said horse, but there's also artifacts from ancient Greece that show some kind of horse-like structure that look vaguely similar to what we see in Troy 2004. I saw something somewhere that said it was probably made from the ruined ships of the Greeks, but looking up information around the Trojan horse, again on Wikipedia, tells me that one interpretation said that the Greeks cut down a grove of Apollo's sacred trees to make the horse. Either way, it's pretty ambiguous as to how it was made. Yeah, again, it's pretty far from the 3D printed slop that Nolan seems to think is acceptable. What was the decision to put it in the low tides? I don't know why, but it ends up in some edgy monologue from Odysseus that's like, "Oh, my men drowned in front of me, it's so sad." You didn't have to put it in the water. What were you doing that for? Aura farming? It's stupid. Yeah, no word of a lie, but yeah, Nolan's Trojan horse looks like it was made of metal, not wood. And it's genuinely the most fugly, awful thing I've seen since the Spacing Guild Navigators in David Lynch's Dune adaptation from, I think, 1984? Therein lies my issue with style over substance. It looks like an anatomically correct horse, but yeah, it's dumb. It's dumb, and it's not even, like, well designed to hide a bunch of Greeks inside. Like, the Troy version from 2004, that looks economically, good enough to hide a bunch of Greeks in there. It looks cool, even. Overall, Troy's far better in its entirety than Nolan's adaptation in portraying the parts of the Trojan War that are present in both the Odyssey and Troy. Whew. Okay, this was a lot. So we're coming to my final thoughts. So, we're at the end. Final thoughts. Unequivocally, The Odyssey, directed by Christopher Nolan and starring Matt Damon, Zendaya, Robert Pattinson, Anne Hathaway, Tom Holland, and other names, absolutely, utterly sucks. To summarize, it has decent sound design in a few scenes, some good acting mentions, and, some scenes that were nicely done. Not excellent, but nicely done. There's many issues, including casting, elements of the story that were terribly done, certain designs, weapons technicalities, poor characterization, and committing cardinal sins of storytelling, including foregoing substance for style, and the obvious show don't tell rule. It's a real shame. I really, really wanted to like this movie. Unfortunately, given the previous controversies, the promotional material that I saw, as well as the trailers, I wasn't given much hope. I remember my thoughts on watching the very first trailer for the Odyssey, first, full length, 2-minute trailer, and yeah, I was like, no, this doesn't feel like it. So like I said much earlier in this video, I went into it with really, really low expectations. The bar is in the ninth circle of hell for literary adaptations these days, and it's frustrating because there's genuinely some really great book adaptations. I did highlight Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. I've got some issues with Guillermo del Toro as a person. He was one of the, just a little tangent here. He was one of the 100 signatories on a petition in 2009 to free director Roman Polanski. If you don't know who Roman Polanski is, a very famous director the world over. His one of his former wives was actress Sharon Tate, who was murdered in the Manson LaBianca murders in 1969. Very, very sad affair. She was 8 months pregnant. It was really horrible instance. And there's people who have covered the Manson the Manson case, the Manson family, and the Tate LaBianca murders far and wide. And yeah, just such a sad case. But the reason why I have an issue with Roman Polanski himself, if you don't know, this guy, he's a pedophile. He was accused of drugging and raping a 13-year-old. And ironically, director Quentin Tarantino, who at the age of 40, grown age, mind you, said that he saw nothing wrong with Roman Polanski doing what he did. He saw nothing wrong with it. He later retracted his statement, thank God. But I say it's ironic because in 2019, Tarantino directed a film called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which also starred Brad Pitt. And it gave an alternative historical take on the Manson family, the Tate LaBianca murders, where, Sharon Tate actually survives. Um, but yeah, it's so ironic, honestly, and really, really sad. I did hear that quite a few actors who were responsible for signing that petition in 2009, including Natalie Portman, I believe, actually retracted that they did it. But honestly, why do it in the first place? Why do it in the first place? For some of these people, it should have sunk their careers. It should have. But Hollywood likes to defend, old men who are pedophiles. So, there's that. But yeah, enough with that tangent. I think if another adaptation of the Odyssey comes by our screens in a few years, notwithstanding Epic the Musical's adaptation with Jerry Bruckheimer, um, and yes, another adaptation is very much likely to happen in at least the way that I see it. I tap Robert Eggers to direct the film. If you don't know Robert Eggers, if you're not familiar with his works, he's directed The Witch, The Northman, The Lighthouse, and Nosferatu, and more recently Werewolf, which will be hitting the screen during the Christmas season of this year, and I am so looking forward to it. I've never seen a Eggers film in cinemas, and best believe when that comes out, I'm taking my butt to go see it right away, pronto. If I can, I'll be there first day that it opens, and I will be there like first showing if I can. Because I love Eggers films. I haven't seen The Witch and The Lighthouse. I found The Lighthouse on Binge, so I will watch it eventually. But I would have to buy The Witch somewhere else, and that's good. I am really apprehensive about watching that movie because it's just very dark subject material. I especially want to highlight The Northman as evidence for why Eggers should be directing a future adaptation of the Odyssey, because he knows how to handle mythological elements really well, while keeping it fantastical and also keeping it grounded. And his mythological imagery is it's beautiful and it's terrifying. The Northman is such a great film. I highly recommend it. It's slightly different tonally than say Nosferatu and The Witch. It's slightly different tonally. I mean, it's no less dark, but yeah, it is slightly different tonally. And it's just a beautiful movie, and I love it. I watched The Northman, during like snippets, like well, no, not snippets, like the quite a bit of the movie when I'd be working out or something, and it's just or just relaxing at home, and it's a beautiful movie. Again, highly recommended. But again, the Odyssey has enough of those horror-esque moments that Eggers is so excellent in constructing his films, such as Nosferatu. And I've seen snippets of The Lighthouse, so I can definitely attest to that he knows how to bring about those horror elements. In a totally different film. Because the Lighthouse is, again, no less dark, but it is, at least from the snippets that I've seen, it feels very tonally different from, some of his other films. But they're just beautiful movies. Robert Eggers is a wonderful director. He's clearly experienced with mythological elements in his works, and he could bring the Greek pantheon to life in a way that Nolan did not attempt, and that he never could, if we're being honest. Speaking of Eggers, if you want me to, I may post a video and feature reviewing Werewolf. Again, I plan to see the video in cinemas when it comes out. I will see The Witch and The Lighthouse eventually when I get around to them, or when I feel less apprehensive to approach them. But look, back to Nolan's adaptation of the Odyssey. It's not great. I don't recommend you see it. If you have and you liked it, I would leave you to your opinion, but I would also consider you to be wrong about said opinion. That's fine. Let's be honest, it's only Tom Holland, Zendaya, and Christopher Nolan that are getting butts in seats. If not for the filmed entirely on IMAX cameras selling point, Christopher Nolan directing, and the incredibly recognizable roster of American actors and actresses, even some British ones like Pattinson and stuff, and there would be no butts in the seats if not for all of that. If not for all of those factors, nobody would go see this movie. In fact, probably the only reason why Epic, the musical, the animated adaptation, would get numbers at all is because it's done so well on TikTok and YouTube, particularly TikTok. It really has not very many recognizable names as we would recognize them in like the Hollywood kind of sphere, which is fine. It's great actually, because it means that unknowns are getting some work. But yeah, again, if not for all of these factors, Nolan's film would flop, and it would flop hard. Literally every Nolan film does this. I have issues where they do, style over substance, save for perhaps the Dark Knight trilogy, which is stylish, but I think it feels more substantial than his other works do. Especially Oppenheimer. I hated Oppenheimer. I almost slept through it, but I only woke up with the sound of the atomic bomb going off. That was loud. But yeah, I hated that movie, and I'll never watch it again. If I will recommend an Odyssey adaptation for sure, it's Epic the Musical. Go listen to it, I beg of you. It's worth it in terms of character development, voice acting, and just the sheer genius of the music. And to boot, it's 20 minutes less runtime than Nolan's adaptation, which, to put it in perspective, that's around roughly one entire saga of Epic, which is about 4 or 5 songs. Say the first saga, which is the Troy saga, for example. Again, cannot wait for the film adaptation. When I say about the runtime, Nolan's film clocks in at 2 hours and 53 minutes, whereas Jorge's film clocks in about 2 hours 23, which, yeah, 20 minutes less runtime. Let's go! Which, yeah, quite a bit should have been cut from Nolan's film, because there's so much. But yeah, I hate it. And if you want to go to Odyssey adaptation, Epic the Musical. Go listen to it, please. Again, I can't wait for the film adaptation. As always, if you like this video, please feel free to like and subscribe to my channel. Again, I'll tolerate no hate in the comments. I realize I've got some hot takes, and whether you like them or not is entirely up to you. Thank you so much for watching and staying until the end. This was a doozy. It was long. We're clocking in at now almost an hour 37. That's long. I think it's my longest video to date yet. But yeah, again, thank you so much for watching, staying until the end. And I hope to see you in the next video. Much love and God bless. Bye.